Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Damn Show on the Critical Blast podcast. I'm your host, Damascus Mintzmeyer. Our regular host, RJ Carter, has been chosen as Earth's newest Green Lantern and is currently battling an extraterrestrial invasion in a distant galaxy. Don't worry, though, he'll be back for our next show, and in the meantime, I'll be interviewing our returning guest, author Mark Gunnells, whose novel Imposter Syndrome was released September 15th from Slasher Horror Press. For the next hour, we'll be discussing ghosts, the pandemic lockdown, paranoia, and the eternal appeal of James Dean. Hi, Mark.
Hi, thanks for having me on. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to see you again, too. It's nice to have you back. It's been a while since you've last appeared, so let's introduce you to our viewers with a question I always like to start my shows with, which is, who are you, what do you do, and why do you do it?
I'm Mark Allen Gunnells. I am a writer. Mostly have been writing horror, although I have shifted away from that a little bit as of late. But I just love telling stories. I always have. I grew up being in love with stories, the escape they provided, and I enjoy doing that myself.
Yeah. You have shifted away from horror a little bit, but horror is still like your mainstay. And your latest novel, Imposter Syndrome, which came out a couple weeks ago, that is definitely a horror story. Explain to the audience just tell us exactly what Imposter Syndrome is and how that relates to the book and what the book is about.
Imposter Syndrome is a take on the classic haunted house story, um, with a few of what I hope are unique wrinkles thrown in. Um, the story centers around a man who is a failed writer, whose father was a famous writer, and when his father passes away, the publisher um, wants the son to finish his father's incompleted manuscript. Um, and he starts to do so, and he starts to believe that the spirit of his father is not too happy that he is working on his book and is trying to stop him. And it's all set during the height of the COVID pandemic when everyone was in lockdown, sort of the stay at home order, which I think increases the claustrophobic, isolated
It
feeling
definitely,
of the novel.
yeah, it definitely does. How did you come up with the idea for this?
It was actually a kind of a confluence of things. I had written a short story called Idle, which was about a writer of paperback horror novels who went to see his favorite author speak. And during the speech, that famous author was like talking about some of the people who are trying to pass themselves off as writers these days, and mentioned the writer who was in the audience and just crushed him.
Ah,
And I started to think, well, maybe I could like roll this into a whole novel. And I had in my teens I had written a novella called The Replacement, which was about a writer who had been hired to finish a deceased writer's work, and that deceased writer was haunting him. So I thought I could do a new version of that. Um, and then when I hit on the idea of making it, instead of just, a famous writer and a failed writer, but making them also father and son, that's when it all started to come together for me in my head.
yeah, I can see the like the lineage of those two like stories you were telling me about, because there is a part in Imposter Syndrome where Maverick or Rick, the main character, he someone's unearthed a YouTube video about
Yeah.
his father talking about, and it turns out he's talking about Rick's books that he wrote earlier in his career. Like he wrote like paperback horror under a pseudonym, and his father is excoriating these books as an example of what's wrong with horror fiction. But that's like a centerpiece of the novel right there. So I can
Yeah,
see that in there.
it was a way for me to get the idea of that short story in there. And the genesis of that idea was that I watched an old um author panel from the 80s with a bunch of really famous horror authors on it. And they were kind of viciously going after other horror writers that they thought weren't
Hmm.
up to their level. And I thought, like, what if some of those horror authors like idolize them, and now they're hearing them, and then so inspiration comes from all kinds of different places, and I love when different things come together and spark something that is almost greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, there's one thing I always like to say, and I do the same thing with a lot of my fiction that you've just done. Is I would say never throw an idea out because you never
Yeah,
know. Like even if you can't get it to work for one thing, you might be able to like recycle it and adapt it into something else.
yeah. And it's funny because, like I said, part of the idea came from that old novella I wrote when I was a teenager, which is not, it would never be published. It's not publishable. But but I liked being able to take that, and I even have, because there are a lot of flashbacks in this novel. So one of the flashbacks near the end, where the main character, when he was a teenager, meets a famous writer
I know
that
the
he
name.
has a crush on. That part of that is taken from that old fiction. Not, I mean, it's not any of that old writing, but those ideas are recycled from that. So it was sort of, even though just to me, a nod to the old work that actually inspired the new work.
That's excellent. So, Rick's dilemma is a really interesting one. What would finishing with his father's lingering spirit actively trying to prevent him from finishing the book? What specific research, if any, did you do for the paranormal angle to this to the story?
Well, I am friends with a paranormal investigator in Savannah, Georgia.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool.
and I peppered him with a lot of questions, um, so much so that he actually has a cameo in the book. In the book,
No,
Rick reaches out to a paranormal investigator,
I was just going to
Ryan
ask
Dunn.
that. I was just going to
Yeah,
ask that.
and
Yeah,
Ryan Dunn is my is my friend in Savannah. I got his
that's cool.
permission to give him a little cameo, but yeah, I asked him a lot of questions because you know I'm kind of a I'm more of a Scully than a Mulder, but I am fascinated by ghost stories and things like that, and um, I respect you know Ryan and what he does and his belief in it. So I wanted to make it seem as plausible, and so those who do believe in it would be able to read the book and feel like I was showing some respect to the community that believes in that.
I think you did a very good job balancing supernatural and psychological horror in this book because you can see it as you're going through the book. You can see like both ways. You can see both angles at play.
Um, and that was something that was important to me, but something that was striking that balance wasn't always easy. There was a lot of thought that had to go into it, and sometimes I had to step away from it for a little while and then come back to it with fresh eyes to see if I was, if I really was striking that balance the way that I wanted to.
How long did it take to write this book anyway? I was curious about that.
Well, it's kind of hard to say because I actually took a year long break in the middle of it. I wrote half of it, um, and then I wasn't sure if it was working, and I actually broke away and I wrote an entirely different novel in the interim. And then I went back to it, actually thinking I was going to have to make a lot of changes if I was going to continue. But when I started going back through it, I actually felt like, okay, now that I have some distance, I do think it was working. I made a few tweaks and then I just kept on going from where I had stopped. And so with that year long break in the middle, I'd say about 6 months, like three on either side.
Oh, that's cool. Look, there's also like a meta angle to the book because, as you pointed out, you made like a it's about Rick and Bentley is Rick's father. The Bentley is like the really successful Uber. like Stephen
Yeah.
King, the kind of writer. He's the international bestseller. And the relationship between Bentley and Rick is almost mirrored in the story because uh, he became famous for writing the senior and junior like paranormal investigative series. So one thing I really liked was when you would get into the parts of the story about senior and junior, and it was almost like a commentary on Bentley and Rick's like father son relationship. So there was almost like a meta angle going on there. I thought that was that by design or something that just came through during the course of the writing?
Um, it was fun to do, and when I was first like contemplating the idea, I was trying to decide what kind of books Bentley wrote. And I hit on this idea, which became the scene where, as a young person, Rick was talking to a counselor about his relationship with his father. And then once the counselor realizes who his father is, it shifts the focus of the session. And so I love this idea that because he wrote about a father and son, people would think that, oh, well, his relationship with his son must be, wonderful, like reflected in the books. But to have that reality be very different, I liked that dichotomy. And so when I did sit down to write it, that was very much in the forward of my mind.
Yeah, I like that. I like that angle that you took there. There was part of me like wishing that the senior and junior books were like real because as you were like describing stuff as you were going along, I was like, these actually sound really interesting. That
Well,
was something I would definitely read.
it isn't. I do like to write about writers, just because I'm fascinated by the craft of writing, not just my own.
Hmm.
Like I love to, listen to other authors talk about, their process and how they do it. Even, it doesn't even have to be writers that I personally am fans of. I'm still interested in how they do it. So anytime I get a chance to create fiction within a fiction, I'm very happy. Um, and I
What I
love
love
coming
about
up
it.
with the ideas of the books within the books, and it feels very much like playing to me when I get to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love the fiction within fiction aspect of this book. And I know that the scene that you're talking about, where Rick has the flashback where he's talking to the counselor, uh, you're right though. That really hits hard. A lot of the flashback scenes on an emotional level really are like gut punches almost. Um, that scene in particular, because as you were saying, when he goes there to try to confide that things aren't really working out for him at school and stuff. He doesn't have any friends, that kind of thing. And and as you say, as soon as the counselor finds out that Bentley is his father, it just the conversation about Rick stops immediately, and it becomes solely about Bentley. So it's like Rick is living in his father's shadow. Like he's grown up in his father's shadow, and now as an adult, he has to like try to throw off his father's legacy in a way.
Um, I mean, I feel like that is a common thing in just in life that so many of us yearn for the approval of people who are never going to approve of us, for whatever reason, for whatever is going on in that person's life. And I do think that it's part of growing up is to realize that, we don't have to want that approval. Like we can let go of that. But writing the flashbacks was really fun to me. They became such a integral part of the makeup of the novel, to a degree that I don't know that I necessarily anticipated when I started writing it. Um, when I hit that first flashback in the first chapter, um, I decided almost spur of the moment because the book is written in first person past tense, but just kind of on a whim when I hit the first flashback, I decided I was going to write those in third person present tense,
Hmm.
just for some interest. And I really like that. And I didn't use any actual names in the flashbacks. So like I never called Rick Rick. He was always, depending on where he was in life, the boy, the teacher, the writer, um, things like that. And that became and I loved writing it so that the flashbacks just inserted themselves in the middle of scenes as opposed to being their own separate sections, because I feel like that's when we go on a mental digression, that's how it happens. We're just in the middle of something and
Yeah.
suddenly we're just having this whole,
Stream of
memory thought
consciousness
spiral.
flow. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and then
yeah.
then it just cuts back to the scene they were in. So writing the flashbacks was a lot of fun to me, and I loved how they integrated themselves into the story as a whole.
Yeah, I love the other thing I love is the you mentioned it earlier was the claustrophobic feel of the lockdown setting.
Mhm.
Um, were you worried that setting the story during COVID was like too recent in history to explore?
Well, I didn't really, because even though it is, really relatively recent, I feel like I don't know about the rest of the world, but I feel like in this country we move on from things quick now,
True.
and I don't say I'm any different. Like sometimes it's almost surreal to remember what it was like, because now once life kind of got back to normal, you
Yeah,
put
it
that
just became
aside.
kind of like a it just
Yeah,
became kind of like a bad dream, really.
yeah.
Like
But when I really seriously started thinking about this novel, it just seemed perfect, because it would make him feel even more isolated. It would make him feel even more trapped in that house. Um, because I also gave the character, he was immunocompromised, so it was like even more dangerous for him to leave the house. And I
mhm.
thought that would just compound all the fears he already had, all the doubts he had about his ability, um, not being able to get out into the world. It just seemed like the perfect opportunity to use that in a way that wasn't a book about the pandemic, but the pandemic actually worked well to heighten the story itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that claustrophobic feel, and it got more intense as it went along. Like that's the other thing. Like the longer he's in the
Yeah.
house, um, and I actually don't think because aside from the flashbacks, I don't think Rick actually ever leaves the house. I think the whole book is like actually in the house except for the flashbacks. Like I mean, he goes outside to
I
like the
think,
yard to meet his neighbor and stuff. But
yeah. I think he drives through the pharmacy drive-through once,
that's right.
um,
That's right.
to get some medication. But other than that, yes, it is very self-contained. And in that way, the flashbacks did serve another purpose, which it opened up the book a little bit. Um, but yeah, for the most part, he is just in that house, in that one environment, and just like most of us were for several months. I know for at least 2 months, I was just always in this house. Um, I was lucky I had my husband with me. But and I was definitely using writing then as a way to deal with anxiety. So for me, luckily, it was a help. But I thought, what if we have this character who it's only compounding his anxiety having to try to write this book? Um, and it just, I don't know, I thought it all came together in a way that felt not forced, but, organic for the story.
True. And plus, it's his father's house. That's the other thing.
Yes.
It's Bentley's house. Bentley died there. And there was a scene where Rick takes a shower and takes a bath, I think, and he realizes. Wait, he's like, "Wait a minute, my dad died in this bathtub." He's
Hmm.
like, but that was kind of like a ooh kind of moment right there. He's like,
Yeah.
he, he thinks he's being haunted by his father's spirit, and he's like, "Wait a minute, my dad died in this tub." And he's like, "Okay."
Yeah. All just, more food for his anxiety. I thought that would be a good idea if his father left in the house. It would, lend more credence to the idea that his father's spirit is lingering. Um, and it is true that sometimes people pass away in your house and you're still there. It's still your house, but it's also the place where they died. And for a story like this, that's just that's gold to keep that engine going.
And so, as you were saying earlier, most people probably know you best as a horror writer, but
Mhm.
you have kind of branched out from that in recent years because you had The Advantage was a couple years ago was a like coming of age college
Yeah.
story. And earlier this summer, you also had another novel released called Triangle.
Hmm.
That's in sort of, I guess, the same sort of vein. You could say it's a coming of age novel. Tell us what that book is about, who the characters are, and how you came up with that idea. Because I love
Well,
this book too. This was good in it was just as good as Imposter Syndrome in a different way.
yeah. Triangle is an interesting one because I had that novel idea when I was a teenager. Um, and it all came about me and my best friend were watching Rebel Without a Cause. And
Excellent
we
film.
were commenting on how queer the movie is. Like to
Hmm.
us, it's obvious that, Plato, the Salminio character, is in love with the James Dean character. Um, and, there's almost this love triangle between him and James Dean and Natalie Wood. And I made the comment that, because it couldn't be blatant, so it was all very under the radar. But maybe if they made it in a more modern time, it could be more blatant. And that I almost instantly had the idea, um, but I never wrote it. It was just an idea that I carried around in my head, so much so that in the I think it was like 2006, I published a novel called Sequel, which was about movie making. And
Hmm.
one of my characters wrote a screenplay called Triangle, and she described the plot, and it was what is now my novel Triangle. But I
Oh, that's
thought,
cool.
oh, I can still get that idea in somewhere, even if I never write that. And so, decades and decades passed, and I wrote a novella called 2B, which was also a really old idea that I finally wrote. And I suddenly thought, maybe I could write Triangle. Because it is, I mean, it's not like a remake of Rebel Without a Cause, but it's kind of that same idea, but much more openly queer. About a bisexual young man who moves to a new town, and he gets involved with a guy that lives next door, but then also has feelings for the guy's sister. And it is coming of age in a way, but it's very more overtly sexual than something like The Advantage that I wrote. Um,
Hmm.
it's darker in a lot of places because it does go to some darker places because it does kind of in a little way follow the trajectory of Rebel Without a Cause. Um, and I was very excited when I got it published because when I had the idea back in college, in my head it had a cover which was just the upside down pink triangle. And
Hmm.
the publisher, I told them that, and they actually made that the cover. So I'm like, this is teenage me's just random musing made flesh now. So I
That's
was
awesome.
really excited when that one got published.
Yeah, there's a small cast, and there's a small cast in Triangle, and it's a very tight narrative. And there's a very intense dynamic between the characters. I think I counted. There's only like five characters. There's Dean. Let's see, Dean, Nate, Sally, Benny, and I think Dean's dead. I think those are the
Yeah,
only actual characters that are in the whole book. So you've
yeah,
got a very tight cast, uh, and they're all very very well explored. Because one thing I like about your writing is that you go very deep into all your characters. Like there's no cardboard, no filler characters. No, you always flesh them out very well. What influenced each character as they developed during the writing process? They all have very distinct personalities too.
well, I love when characters are more than one thing. Um, you know,
Because
we grow
everybody's
up
like
with
that. I mean, everybody's
narratives.
more than one thing. Yeah.
Because we grow up with narratives where there's like hero, villain, and hero is all good, villain is just all cartoonish evil. But people aren't like that. Uh, the most people you meet on the street, most people, including myself, we have good qualities and bad qualities. Um, and it sometimes the good qualities are winning, and sometimes the bad qualities are winning. And a lot of their personalities developed after I started writing. That happens a lot with me. It's when I get them talking and interacting, and I really figure out who they are. Um, Dean is someone who's really struggling with a troubled past, some addiction problems, um, and he's trying to be better. But he also has some very strict views in his head about relationships and sex, and he doesn't want to break out of that, which causes some problems. And Nate is a character who is very troubled himself, but is desperate for love and attention to an almost obsessive degree. And Sally is somebody who is trying to elevate herself, trying to
Hmm.
redefine herself. Um, and in a lot of ways, she was my favorite to write because I think at times we all want to just do away with all the preconceived notions that people have about us and just remake ourselves. And when you get those three characters together, um, those personalities are going to clash. Sometimes they're going to gel. Sometimes they're going to repel each other. And it was a lot of fun to explore all the different dynamics of that love triangle.
I even liked how you portrayed Sally's ex-boyfriend Benny as a
Hmm.
three-dimensional figure. Because a lot of writers could have just taken the easy way out and made him like, because he comes from a trailer park. He's got a rough background, and
Yeah.
a lot of people could have just portrayed him as a one-dimensional cliche. Like you actually went out of your way to like point out that he's a fully realized figure in his own right.
And that was a lot of fun too because initially tr- almost wanted him to come off like the one dimensional character that you almost might expect, and then start adding in some layers. Um, and I really did take my cue there from um, Rebel Without a Cause because there was a character in that was, kind of bullying James Dean character. But there was a moment before they had their chicken run where he was just kind of real and talking to him. And so I wanted to mirror that a little bit too. I had a lot of little nods to Rebel Without a Cause in there, starting with the names. Um,
Right.
and Denny lived in the Griffith Trailer Park because there's the famous scene at Griffith Park. And but yeah, I really did want them all. I feel like nobody was without flaws here, but nobody was
Right.
without humanity either.
It's true. What comes first when you create like a character? Because you were just talking about they develop like personality as you get them to interact. Well, what comes first? You create a name, an image, backstory. Like, how do you actually develop a character? How do they come to you first?
Well, usually I'll start with the general premise, and then I think what kind of people would be in this situation. And initially, it's sort of broad strokes. Like I knew, Nate was going to have some mental health struggles. I knew that Denny was going to have some um, very strong views about, as a bisexual man, what his relationships were. I knew that Sally was going to be somebody who wanted to be better than she had been. Um, But beyond those more broad terms, I wasn't sure yet. It really is when I get into the writing and I get them interacting with each other. That's when I kind of figure out who they really are, like what they really think, how they really feel about things. Um, I can't create a fully realized character in an outline. Like, I have to be in the story, and that's when they really start to come to life for me. So I start out with just some broad strokes about, a few personality traits, a few key things for their backstory, and then I let it really expand in the actual writing of it.
What's your writing process like? I mean, do you have to have complete silence? Do you listen to music? I mean, what do you how do you what's like your
Well,
creative
throughout my
perfect
life,
creative environment?
I, yeah, I have written so many different ways. Um, I always find I can adapt to whatever situation I'm in. But these days, I like to write in the mornings before work. I used to put on music, but now I don't. It's usually just quiet in here in my office, and I don't put a lot of pressure on myself as far as like word count or page numbers. Um, Maybe I'll write 2 pages one day, maybe I'll write a paragraph the next day.
Hmm.
I find
I
that
do that too.
that lack of pressure makes it more conducive for me to keep going. But yeah, I love to write in the mornings um, before I go to work. It's a nice way to start the day, to be creative. Um, and I feel like it puts me in a good mindset for the rest of the day because it is something I love to do, so I get to start the day doing that thing.
That's cool. Yeah, I like to write in the mornings. I love there's something about waking up and being like after you've slept and there's like you've rested and then you wake up and your mind is like energized and you can just
Yeah,
get it out a lot easier. And man, I'm like you. I've written in some of this. Talk about adapting to different situations. I've written in the strangest places. I've literally written in like laundromats and stuff before.
yeah.
Just like yeah.
And
So
I used to write there. I mean, this was years ago, but I have a job where I could write at work, but I never knew when or for how long. So I might have like 10-minute pocket here where I could write, and then 2 hours later, 15. And like I adapted to that's how I wrote, so that when I didn't have that job anymore and I had more time to write, I had to adapt to that again.
mhm. What do you think it is about James Dean that still gives him such widespread appeal 70 years after his death?
Well, I mean, this may sound odd, but because he died so young, um, I feel like when that happens, and especially if they're at kind of at their height when that happens, then it does create this legend, sort of. Um, because, for
Or what might
instance,
have been?
also of his time was, Marlon Brando. Um, and you still look at those, Marlon Brando films and they're wonderful and he was wonderful. But, a lot of people also kind of remember Marlon Brando from the end of his life.
Mhm. True.
And, he maybe wasn't at, the top of his game at that point. It's sort of like, when they say a TV show, when the shows know when to quit, when they're still at the top, because if they keep going on too long, sometimes there's an almost inevitable decline. But because he
Yeah.
was young, he was at the height of his success, and then he was gone. It almost creates a hunger, like, what could have been if he had kept on, and I feel like that keeps him alive that way. Um, and Rebel Without a Cause, which is, I think, undoubtedly probably his most well-known movie. Um, Even though East of Eden and Giant are also great, but it spoke to a certain alienation of youth that is almost it wasn't just for that one generation. Every generation feels it in its own way. So I think that has also kept him sort of more in the forefront of the zeitgeist.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, because I think you're absolutely right. Because you can also look at say like Elvis was the other big like rebellious figure of that period of time. But
Yeah.
as you pointed out, as time went on, he kind of became almost like a parody of himself.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you're right. I think that is an excellent way of putting it. Uh, so, what books are you reading right now?
Well, right now I am reading How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix.
Oh,
Um,
cool. I love
and
Grady Hendrix.
yeah, and it was I had a little trouble getting into it at the beginning, but I then it hooked me in. I'm a little over halfway through it, and it's just wonderful insanity. And I'm also reading. Um, oh, I can't think of the title. It's the second book in Christopher Rice's Burning Girl series. I
Hmm,
want to say it's called Blood Echo, maybe. Um,
hmm,
but he wrote this series about in a way, it's almost a superhero story about a woman with enhanced powers who basically targets serial killers.
Oh,
And
cool.
it's a lot of fun. Um, and those are I'm usually reading about two books at a time, so those are the two I'm currently reading.
Oh, excellent. What authors are out there right now that you think are deserving of like wider recognition?
Oh, well, there are so many. There is a writer named Carter Sickles who wrote a book called The Prettiest Star, which is one I always bring up when anybody says recommend a book or author you think you needs a wider audience. I love that book. Um, it's not horror. It is, although I mean, it is horrific. It's set in the '80s during the AIDS epidemic, um, about a gay man dying of AIDS who goes back to his small town to die in his parents' home, and then how he's treated by that community. Um,
Hmm,
I always recommend that. Um, I'm also a big fan of David Dimchuk. I think probably most well known for his novel Red X. Um,
hmm.
and he was very generous to me and actually read and blurbed Imposter Syndrome, uh,
Oh, cool.
which was a huge thrill for me because I didn't think he will. I never think anybody's really gonna want to read and blurb my books, but
Oh, no.
I definitely recommend. And he's a strong queer voice in horror as well. Um, there's also a writer named Carlos E. Rivera who wrote a trilogy called the White Harbor Trilogy for Slashic Press, and that is some great stuff right there. I really recommend that trilogy. It has a very I don't want to say retro feel, but there's there's feelings of like early Stephen King in it, but it is also very queer, which appeals to me. But
Hmm.
it was just excellently written, so I definitely recommend him as well.
Excellent. Those are awesome. I'm gonna check some of those out. Okay. Finish this sentence. My favorite scene in Imposter Syndrome is.
Probably it is and I don't know. It's just the first one that comes to mind, but the flashback where he's meeting with the editor that's going to publish his first novel. Um, it's it's not the most spooky scene, but there was something about that scene that I felt really worked and really got to the excitement of a young author out there trying to get his stuff out there and finding somebody finally who believes in that work. Um, I just that's the first one that comes to mind. I really enjoyed writing that scene.
I like that scene a lot too. That editor, she sounded like a really. I don't know if you based her on somebody real or not, but she actually sounded like a really cool person that you was.
Yeah. She was a lot of fun to write, and then of course there's sort of a mirror scene later that's maybe not as uplifting, but yeah, that was it was fun to create that character, and I was basing that publisher um on the Abyss line of books from the 90s,
Hmm.
the Del Abyss line of horror novels. Um, that was sort of my inspiration for that line that he got in, um, and so it was fun to do that.
Okay, let's do the same for Triangle. What's your favorite scene in that book?
Probably the scene at the park where tragedy befalls.
I know
There
the
was
one you're
something
talking about.
about Yeah, there was something about that scene. It comes near the end, so I don't want to give away too much, but it's almost all of our main characters um, somewhere they shouldn't be at a time they shouldn't be there. Some of them very inebriated, and there was something about the scene that felt um, exciting and dangerous, and um, and of course, you know, the consequences of that scene change the trajectory of the book, and you know, takes us straight toward the ending that the book has. Um, so it was a pivotal scene, and I liked the interactions that led up to, you know, the tragic moment. So probably that one.
Excellent. Okay, Fantasyland time. Hollywood options both Imposter Syndrome and Triangle for movie deal. Who directs each film, and which actors would you love to see in the lead roles?
Oh, see, that's going to be difficult for Triangle just because I have no idea who the young actors are in Hollywood anymore.
Neither do I.
So, you know, but but I don't know. I Triangle is such a even though it's not a horror novel, there's a real darkness to it.
There
Um
is. It's almost there's it's not horror, but there's a very like you said, there's a very dark psychological angle to it, especially
yeah.
towards the end with
It,
me.
it's not like The Advantage, which is a more traditional coming of age story, I think. Um but you know, I could see somebody, you know, like um Michael Landon, that director. Um I could see him doing something with that that would be, you know, interesting and cool. Um, but as to who would star in it, well, I will tell you, you know, Sally, the character in Triangle, in my head, um, it kills me because I can't remember the actress's name, but she played Ruth in the show Ozark, and she was just in the movie Weapons. Um,
Oh,
but
hang on.
I saw a brunette version of her in my head when I was right because I don't know if you've seen Ozark, but the character of Ruth
I've
was just
heard
a
of it.
powerhouse, and I wanted to give Sally some of that attitude, which is probably um, why I saw her. As for imposter syndrome, um, you know, I think an actor who maybe I would like to see someone like a queer actor like Neil Patrick Harris or even Sean Hayes, who are known for more comedy,
Hmm.
because I think that would be because you know at some points you know Rick is almost a comedic character and then you know it flips and he's more of a tragic character, and I think somebody who does comedy might could do that, and somebody who's not known for stepping out of comedy too much could really surprise people.
Yeah,
I
Neil
could see
Patrick Harris
something
would be good
like
for
that.
that. Yeah,
Mm.
the actress from Weapons you were talking about, Julia Garner.
That yes, but yeah, so you know in my head I was channeling her in Ozark into Sally.
I could see Neil Patrick Harris as Rick. I remember I saw him years and years ago on an episode of I think it was Law and Order. He was playing like a Jeffrey Dahmer style cannibal serial killer.
Yeah,
So He definitely can. I mean, he does the comedic thing really well, but he definitely can be dark.
Yeah.
That would fit. Okay, let's see. Okay, okay. It's my favorite part of the show is what I call the lightning round of nerd questions. Since
Okay.
you've been here before, you've been here before and you answered some of the other ones. So I made them a little different than the usual ones I ask.
Okay.
So all right. So this is kind of like free association. I ask a question, you answer with like the first thing that pops into your head. Ready?
Okay.
All right. Favorite movie overall of the last 12 months?
Sinners.
Ah, of that movie. That is such a good movie.
Yeah.
My favorite part in that is when Sammy's playing his guitar at the juke joint and all the spirits from the past and the future, like the
Yeah.
musicians show up. That was like mind blowing. I love
I
that.
loved the use of music in that in particular. I thought it really elevated it.
It did. Absolutely. Okay. What was the worst horror movie you've seen in the last 12 months?
Um, it was, and it might be controversial, but it was the 28 Years Later movie.
I saw that.
I know it's very popular, but I was not the target audience.
That I have heard so many. I've seen that movie too, and I had like a mixed reaction to it because some of it I liked and other parts of it I absolutely hated. But everyone I know either like loves it or hates it. There's almost like no middle ground. I hated the ending, like that
Yeah,
cliffhanger ending. I
that was
absolutely hated that.
that yeah. I feel like I already
It
wasn't a big fan of it, but the ending really
yeah,
sucked it down
when
even
that
more.
came, yeah, I won't blow it for people who haven't seen it, but you've seen it. You know what I'm talking about. When they come out
Yeah,
and they're doing the kung fu and shit,
yeah,
I was like, what am I watching? What did this turn into? What happened?
yeah.
It's like, and that's what they're leaving it off of till the next movie. And I'm like, okay, but yeah, so yeah, I could see that. 28 years later, it didn't even feel like a 28 days, 28 weeks later. It didn't even
No,
feel like it
it
fit
did.
in with the first two.
It didn't.
That's the
It
other
like
thing.
I was such a fan of the first one in particular, and parts of the second one, but no, it didn't feel to me like it was of that universe. It felt
No, it felt
it's
like a
all.
different. Yeah. All right. Favorite TV show of the moment.
Um, I am really into the Gilded Age.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
and yeah, not horror, but yeah, it is since Mike Flanagan doesn't have any shows out currently, which I am a huge fan of all the Mike Flanagan shows. But the Gilded Age, I'm 100% suckered into that.
Oh, cool. Okay. What's the last musical album you listened to?
When I was out today, I was listening to Diva by Annie Lennox in my car.
Oh, cool. I love. I think she was in the Eurythmics, right? If I
Yeah,
remember correctly. Yes.
yeah.
Okay. I love the Eurythmics. Okay. What's the last junk food you indulged in?
Um, let's see. I mean, you can probably tell I don't eat as much junk food as I did when I was younger. My body can't take it anymore. But let's see. The last thing I had was Reese's cup at work because somebody brought in a bunch of Reese's cups.
I
And
love
it took a
those.
lot right now for me not to say Reese's cups because that's what I usually call them.
Okay. What was the name of your first pet?
I had a little dog named Peanut.
Oh, that's cute. First celebrity crush.
Um, Luke Skywalker, um,
Oh,
because I had just seen Star Wars, because I'm that old. And I mean, I was pretty young, but I was drawn to Luke Skywalker, definitely.
awesome. If you were a superhero, what would be your code name, your superpower, and who would be your arch nemesis?
Hmm. If I was a superhero, let's see. I've never really thought about that. My superpower would probably be telekinesis, just because there's so many times I want something and I don't want to get up and get it. But I don't know how that would help people that much. I'll get stuff for them as well. So I guess my arch nemesis would just keep moving it further away. I guess he would be called Get Up and Get It.
Oh, I love it. I love that. Oh man. Okay. You're stranded on a deserted island. What three things do you take with you?
Well, I almost said my Kindle, but then I wouldn't have any way to charge it. Um, but I would have to have a book, and a good one, because I'd probably have to read it over and over. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, I probably want a cell phone just so I could call someone and tell them to come get me.
That's
I
cool.
mean, you didn't tell me I couldn't have a cell phone, and
Nope, you can.
maybe there's a signal, maybe not, and then maybe I would bring a an extra boat.
That sounds good. Okay. Tom and Jerry or Sylvester and Tweety?
I was more of a Sylvester and Tweety. I did watch Tom and Jerry, but yeah, I watched more Sylvester and Tweety.
Yeah, I love them. I love all of them, but I probably like Sylvester and Tweety also. Tweety was probably one of my favorite cartoons ever, just because he's cute but very very naughty. Like, he's very okay. Favorite vacation spot.
Um, I love Savannah, Georgia. Um, we go there a lot. Um, I even set a book there because it's just a favorite place for me to go. But lately we've also been spending every Christmas um, at a place called St. Simon's Island in Georgia, which is on the beach. Um, and that's become a favorite of mine as well.
Cool. Okay, you get to have dinner with any three dead historical figures. Who are they, and what do you ask them?
Well, I would love to have um, lunch with Anne Rice because I love Anne Rice. Um, and I would just, she had so much, she just did whatever she wanted to do. She wasn't following trends. She just wrote whatever weird thing popped into her head. And I would love to ask her, you know, how she navigated that, how she just, because, I mean, she would even admit in interviews, like, every book she wrote, some people were calling the worst book ever written,
Right.
but she just seemed to just shrug that off and keep doing her thing. So I would love to sit down and ask her about that. Um, you know, I would, love to sit down with someone like Harvey Milk, who was really at the forefront of like the queer rights movement back then. Um, Figures that really helped us get where we are. Um, and find out what it was really like. I feel like sometimes we lose some of our history in the queer community the more rights we gain. um,
Hmm.
but it's still very important, especially now, to remember that. And so I would love to talk to someone like him, and you know maybe Shakespeare, and ask him, like, did you really write those plays or not?
I've heard that theory before. I personally, I think he did. I actually think Shakespeare wrote it because
Yeah,
none of the
well, I'll
other
let you know
theories
when I have dinner with him.
I never quite bought the idea that it was Sir Francis Bacon or that it was Kit Marlowe or something like
Yeah.
that.
But that happens a
Okay.
lot. I remember people saying that Anne Rice didn't write her own books. So I feel like anytime anyone gains some success, people think somebody else is responsible.
That's true. So what's next for Mark Gunnells?
Well, on a personal level, I will keep enjoying my job. I'm keep enjoying my life with my husband in our beautiful home. Um, on the writing front, I just finished a novella, which is a sequel to a novel I wrote several years ago that's now out of print, but it will be coming back into print with the novella sequel. Um,
I want to read
that
those.
hasn't
I
been
want to read
announced
those.
yet, so I can't tell the publisher. But if anybody remembers, I had a novel out called The Exchange Student, which was a time travel thing,
Yeah,
and
I love
I'm
time
always
travel.
I love time travel, and I'd always wanted to write a sequel to it. Um, but then the book went out of print, and I was like, oh. And then I just decided, well, I'm going to write the sequel anyway. And then only after I started writing the sequel did I end up, you know, making a deal with a publisher to bring the first book back into print with the sequel. So I just finished that, and I'm going through it now and doing what I call a polish. And I'm actually thinking my next novel is going to be time travel as well, um,
Yeah,
um,
awesome.
called called Do Over. But it's going to be, I mean, probably nobody's going to remember this movie, but it's kind of like a gender swapped Peggy Sue Got Married kind of a
I
thing.
remember that.
Okay,
I remember
so
that movie.
it's going to be very different from the time travel thing I just finished, but I'm thinking that's going to be my next big project.
I'd love to read those. The new novella and the original novel. I'd
Yeah,
like to read those and review those.
yeah.
That sounds like
Well,
fun.
when they come out, I'll send you one because the first one that was a lot of fun, and I had this idea for a sequel, and I'm really happy that I finally got it down on paper.
Awesome. Any shout outs you want to give?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for having me on again. It's very nice of you to
Or
help me pimp my wares, and I want to
yeah,
say hello to
anytime.
my beautiful husband Craig, who's watching, always supports me, um, and you know my best friend from high school, um, Melissa, who has really I told her one time she knows where all the stories came from. And I have a wonderful work family that helps me a lot as well. So just shout out to all of them.
Awesome. Where can people find
And
you
to
online?
Slashik Press, Slashik Press, who published Imposter Syndrome, is doing a lot of good work getting queer voices out there. And I'm very happy to be part of that family as well.
That's good. Where can people find you online?
Uh, I mostly post on Instagram. I'm on there as Make Reading Cool Again. I am on Facebook sporadically. I take breaks where I suspend my account because sometimes social media is a little too much. I am on there right now because I'm promoting. Um, but mostly, I'm on Instagram, and I have an author page on Amazon.
All right. I want to thank you for being a guest tonight, Mark. It was really, really fun talking to you again. I always look forward to having you on the show. And I look forward to having you on the show again whenever your next books come out.
Okay, well,
And
thank you. I
to
appreciate
anyone watching, head on over to Amazon and check out Imposter Syndrome. And don't forget to snag a copy of Triangle while you're there. If you enjoyed tonight's show, remember, like, share, subscribe to Critical Blast on YouTube. And that's it for tonight. The damn show is done.